Chica was the kind of young woman who believed life had finally bent to her desires. Born into a middle-class family in Enugu, she once lived simply, but everything changed the moment she became engaged to Uchenna, the handsome son of a wealthy businessman. The engagement ring on her finger was more than a symbol of love. It became her badge of superiority. Friends noticed how quickly she began to change, walking with her chin raised high, speaking as if she were already a queen, and dismissing anyone she considered beneath her. To Chica, marrying Uchenna meant she was untouchable, a step above the rest, destined for a life of power and admiration. Her arrogance only grew as the wedding day drew near. She walked through the bustling marketplace like it was her runway, her wrapper swaying, her face set in confidence. Traders greeted her, some with admiration, others with hidden envy. But she barely acknowledged them, convinced they all envied her upcoming union with wealth. Then, in the middle of the noisy crowd, something unexpected happened. An old beggar, dirty and ragged, stretched out his trembling hand toward her. His voice was weak as he asked for help. The moment his hand brushed her arm, Chica's pride turned to fire. She spun around, her eyes blazing with fury. Without hesitation, she slapped him hard across the face. The sound echoed through the market, silencing the chatter for a moment. Onlookers gasped, shocked by the sight. Mothers carrying baskets of yams stopped mid-step. Traders froze in disbelief, and murmurs spread like wildfire. But Chica, instead of feeling shame, lifted her chin higher and spat out, "How dare you touch me with your filthy hands? Do you know who I am?" The beggar lowered his head without a word and slowly walked away, his figure swallowed by the crowd. The market buzzed again, but this time with whispers about Chica's cruelty. Yet she smiled to herself, proud and unbothered, convinced that no one could question her, not when she was about to become the wife of Enugu's most desirable heir. The slap still rang in the air as the beggar staggered back, his frail body trembling. His name was Okori, though few in the crowd knew it. He did not fight back, nor did he raise his voice in protest. Instead, he lowered his head, his shoulders slumped in silence, and with slow, heavy steps, he began to walk away. His ragged slippers scraped against the dusty ground, leaving faint marks as he disappeared into the throng of people. The marketplace, usually filled with laughter, bargaining, and noise, was now buzzing with murmurs. "Did you see that?" one woman whispered as she clutched her basket tighter. "A bride-to-be treating an old man like trash," another replied, shaking her head. "God is watching," an elderly man muttered, his eyes following Okori's retreating figure. Chica, however, was unmoved. She adjusted her headscarf and placed her hands on her hips, her face still burning with anger. "He deserves it," she snapped loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Imagine touching me with those filthy hands. Who knows what diseases he carries? People like that should learn to stay in their place." Her words cut through the silence, leaving many stunned. Some pitied the beggar, others looked at Chica with disgust, but she didn't care. To her, their stares and whispers were nothing compared to the life of glory she believed awaited her. She turned sharply, her wrapper swishing as she walked away, leaving behind a trail of judgment and gossip. Vendors shook their heads, mothers pulled their children closer, and men exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't just the slap, it was the pride in her voice, the lack of remorse in her tone, that unsettled them most. As Okori vanished down the street, his back bent with sorrow, one old woman selling roasted plantains whispered under her breath, "The world turns, my daughter. Today you shame him, tomorrow you may need him." But Chica didn't hear, or perhaps she didn't care. She walked home that day with her chin raised, convinced she had defended her dignity, unaware that the shame she thought she avoided was only beginning to follow her. Back at home, Chica was surrounded by boxes of lace wrappers, golden jewelry, cartons of wine, and expensive household items sent by Uchenna's family. Her mother fussed over the gifts with pride, arranging them neatly in the sitting room so that every visitor could see. The aroma of fried meat and jollof rice filled the air as relatives came in and out, congratulating Chica and praising her luck. To many, she was a bride-to-be, walking into a life others could only dream of. Chica sat in the center of it all, fanning herself gently while her friends gathered around. She wore a bright smile, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Look at me now," she said, raising her left hand to show off her glittering ring. "In a few days, I'll be Madame Chica Uchenna, living in mansions, driving the finest cars, and traveling abroad like those rich Lagos women." Her friends clapped and laughed, though some exchanged quiet glances. Chica leaned closer, lowering her voice but ensuring everyone heard. "This is why I say poverty is a curse. Who wants to suffer when you can marry wealth? Some girls waste time on poor men. Not me. I chose wisely." She burst into laughter, tossing her head proudly. "I can already picture my new life. I'll have servants, drivers, and people to run around for me. No more market stress, no more walking under the sun. From now on, people will call me Madam, and they will respect me." Her mockery stung one of her childhood friends, Ngozi, who came from a struggling family. Ngozi forced a smile, but said nothing. Chica didn't notice. She was too busy dreaming aloud. Every word she spoke only fed her pride, convincing her more and more that her future was secure. To her, wealth was the shield that would protect her from shame, and marrying Uchenna was her golden ticket out of the ordinary. But as she boasted and laughed, somewhere in the shadows of her fortune, fate was quietly waiting to remind her that pride never lasts forever. While Chica basked in her growing pride, Uchenna carried a heavy burden that he never spoke about. On the outside, he was the perfect groom, handsome, wealthy, and admired by many. But deep within, his heart wrestled with pain and guilt that no one around him could see. Years ago, his father, Okorie, had been a successful businessman who commanded respect in Enugu. Their family lived in comfort until one fateful decision changed everything. Betrayed by his own business partners in a risky investment, Okorie lost every kobo overnight. The shame of the downfall was too heavy for him to bear. Friends abandoned him, relatives turned their backs, and whispers filled the streets. One morning, without a word, Okorie left home and never returned. Uchenna was still young, but the image of his father's weary face as he walked out the door was seared into his memory. From that day, he silently carried the wound of abandonment. As the years passed, rumors spread. Some said Okorie had gone mad. Others claimed he wandered the streets, dressed in rags, too ashamed to show his face again. Uchenna never stopped wondering where he was, if he was alive, if he ate, if he still thought of him. He searched quietly, sending inquiries, visiting places where the poor gathered, even slipping money to street boys for news. Each time, he returned home with disappointment. Now, on the eve of his wedding, the guilt pressed even harder. Here he was, preparing for a life of celebration, yet the man who gave him life might still be out there suffering. The thought tortured him. He would sit alone at night, staring at old family photographs, whispering promises to himself. "I will find you, Papa. No matter how long it takes, I will bring you back home." But this was a truth he never shared with Chica. She loved the image of wealth and power, and he feared her scorn if she ever discovered his father's disgrace. Yet fate has a way of unmasking secrets, and Uchenna's hidden pain was closer to the surface than he ever imagined. The evening air was calm, filled with the distant sound of drums from neighbors rehearsing for the wedding celebration. Chica stepped out of her compound, dressed in a fine wrapper, her head high as always. She was admiring the decorations being set up when a shadow caught her eye. At the corner of the street, standing near a palm tree, was the same beggar she had slapped days earlier. His clothes were torn, his hair unkempt, and his eyes heavy with sadness. He stared quietly, as if trying to say something without words. Chica's blood boiled instantly. "You again!" she shouted, her voice sharp enough to make bystanders turn. Haven't you learned your lesson? If I ever see you near me again, you will regret it." She raised her hand threateningly, and the beggar lowered his gaze, his lips trembling but silent. To Chica, his silence was proof of weakness, and she felt victorious. "Stay away from me," she barked before turning back toward her gate. But what Chica didn't notice was Uchenna standing a few steps behind. He had just arrived and froze the moment his eyes fell on the beggar. His breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding as recognition hit him. The lines on the beggar's face, the way he shifted his weight, even the faint scar on his chin. These were not the features of a stranger. Uchenna's chest tightened, his hands trembling as he whispered under his breath, "Papa." The beggar looked up briefly, their eyes meeting for a split second, and Uchenna felt the world spin. He wanted to run to him, to embrace him, but confusion held him still. Could it really be his father, the man he had searched for all these years, reduced to this state? Chica, too consumed by her anger, stormed inside without noticing Uchenna's expression. Guests inside the compound laughed and sang, oblivious to the storm brewing at the gate. Uchenna remained frozen, his gaze locked on the beggar, his mind torn between shock, sorrow, and the desperate need for answers. His past had just walked back into his life, and nothing would ever be the same. Uchenna could no longer ignore the truth pressing against his chest. That evening, after the compound had grown quieter and Chica was busy entertaining her friends, he slipped out and followed the beggar down the dusty road. His steps were unsteady, his heart pounding with fear and hope. When they reached a quiet corner beneath an old mango tree, Uchenna finally called out, his voice trembling, "Papa, is it really you?" The beggar stopped. Slowly, he turned, and their eyes met under the fading light. For a moment, time stood still. The weary man's face carried deep lines of suffering, his beard unkempt, his clothes tattered, yet his eyes, those same gentle eyes Uchenna remembered from childhood, were unmistakable. Tears blurred Uchenna's vision as his breath caught in his throat. "Papa, it's me, Uchenna." Okori's lips quivered, but he said nothing. He simply nodded, lowering his gaze as shame weighed him down. His silence spoke louder than words. He had once been a man of wealth and honor, now reduced to a wanderer begging for scraps. Uchenna stepped closer, his hands shaking. "All these years I searched for you. Why didn't you come back home? Why did you suffer alone?" Okori finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. "My son, I lost everything. My partners betrayed me, and the world turned its back. I couldn't face you, your mother, or the shame. I thought it was better if I disappeared." Tears spilled down Uchenna's face as he grabbed his father's worn hands. "No, Papa, you are not a failure. You are my father. I don't care about riches. I only wanted you back." His voice broke, but his grip grew firm. "You are coming home with me. Tomorrow, the world will know you are my father again." Okori's eyes filled with tears, his body trembling as he whispered, "After all I've become, you still claim me." Uchenna nodded fiercely. "Always." Under the quiet night sky, father and son embraced, both broken yet bound together again by love stronger than shame. The wedding day dawned with excitement that spread through the entire neighborhood. Luxury cars lined the streets, their polished surfaces gleaming under the sun. The compound had been transformed into a grand celebration ground, with colorful canopies, fresh flowers, and drummers beating rhythms that drew in curious onlookers. Guests in elegant lace and agbada outfits filled the seats, fanning themselves as they laughed and exchanged greetings. The air smelled of rich food, jollof rice, goat meat, and spices drifting from the caterer's corner. Chica stepped out of her room dressed in a gown that shimmered with sequins, her head wrapped in a jewel so high it seemed to touch the sky. She walked slowly, savoring the gasps and praises that followed her every step. Photographers clicked eagerly, capturing her radiant smile as she waved like royalty. For Chica, this was the victory lap of her life, the final proof that she had risen above everyone else. Her heart swelled with pride as she thought, "At last, I am where I deserve to be." Inside the decorated hall, music filled the air as dancers entertained the crowd. Uchenna moved among the guests, smiling politely, but his heart was heavy with the secret he carried. Still, he pushed on, waiting for the right moment. Meanwhile, all eyes remained on Chica. She basked in the glory, nodding approvingly at the gifts stacked high in the corner, and the whispers of admiration that followed her every move. Her friends clustered around, praising her beauty and luck, while she smiled, certain nothing could spoil her day. But outside the hall, an uninvited figure approached. Dressed in ragged clothes, barefoot and weary, Okori stepped quietly through the gate. Some guests noticed him, but assumed he was a poor man who had wandered in. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning the decorations, his steps carrying both pain and courage. As Chica raised her glass, laughing loudly at a joke, she didn't see him enter. But Uchenna did. His breath caught, his chest tightened. The moment he had both dreaded and prayed for had finally arrived. The past had walked into the very heart of their celebration. The moment came for the formal introductions. The master of ceremonies called for the groom to present his family, and the hall grew quiet with expectation. Guests leaned forward, eager to see the powerful relatives of the wealthy Uchenna. Chica's smile widened as she imagined the prestige that would soon be hers. She straightened her jewel, her eyes sparkling with pride. Uchenna rose slowly, his heart pounding. Every step toward the stage felt heavier than the last. He took the microphone, his voice steady, though his hands trembled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "it is my honor to present to you my father." Murmurs rippled through the hall as he gestured toward the entrance. Then, to the shock of everyone, a man in ragged clothes stepped forward. Okori, thin and weary, shuffled into the light, his head slightly bowed. For a moment, silence blanketed the hall. The contrast was jarring. The glittering chandeliers, the polished floor, the richly dressed guests, and this old beggar standing in the center of it all. Gasps erupted, followed by whispers that swept like wildfire. "Is this a joke?" someone muttered. "That's the beggar from the market," another voice exclaimed. Eyes widened, hands covered mouths, and fans froze mid-air. Chica's world collapsed in an instant. Her body went cold as her eyes locked on Okoria's face. Recognition struck like thunder. The same man she had slapped and insulted in public now stood before her as her future father-in-law. Her legs weakened, and she gripped her chair for balance. "No, it cannot be," she whispered, her voice trembling. All the arrogance drained from her face, replaced by fear and humiliation. Guests turned to her, their gazes sharp, their whispers louder. She tried to force a smile, but her lips quivered. Uchenna stood firm, his arm around his father. His eyes scanned the room, then rested on Chica, whose pride had shattered before the very crowd she once sought to impress. The glamorous hall had turned into a courtroom, and Chica stood on trial. Her past cruelty was no longer a secret. It was her curse, revealed at the height of her dreams. The hall was so silent that the sound of Okori's weary breath could be heard. He stood beside his son, his hands trembling slightly as he faced the sea of shocked faces. Lifting his head slowly, he began to speak, his voice soft, yet heavy with pain. "Not long ago," he said, "I reached out to a young woman in the market. My stomach was empty, and my spirit was tired. I asked only for kindness, but instead, I was struck in the face." A gasp rippled through the guests, their eyes darting immediately to Chica. She shrank in her chair, wishing the ground would swallow her. Okori's eyes glistened as he continued. I did not curse her. I only walked away in silence, carrying the weight of shame on my shoulders. To be treated as less than human by the one who was soon to become my son's wife. This pain was heavier than hunger. His words pierced through the hall, touching even the hardest hearts. The guests murmured in disapproval, some shaking their heads, others whispering harshly about Chica's arrogance. Chica's face burned with humiliation. The confidence she once wore like a crown had vanished. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Every whisper felt like a dagger, every glance a reminder of the wound she had created. Uchenna stood between them, his heart in turmoil. He looked at his father, the man he had longed for and finally found, and then at Chica, the woman he had promised to marry. His chest ached with conflict. Could he truly bind his life to a woman who looked down on the poor, who had humiliated his father without mercy? Okorie turned to his son, his voice breaking. Uchenna, my son, wealth fades, but character remains. A woman who despises the poor will one day despise you when fortune changes. The words hung in the air like a judgment. The murmurs grew louder, the atmosphere heavy with truth. For the first time, Chica saw the future slipping from her hands, while Uchenna stood torn, forced to choose between love blinded by pride and respect grounded in dignity. The music that once filled the hall had faded into silence. Guests who had come to witness a union of wealth and glamour now sat in uneasy whispers, their eyes fixed on the stage where Uchenna stood, his jaw clenched in pain. Chica reached for him desperately, her voice breaking. Uchenna, please, I can explain. I didn't know. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to hold on to the dream that was slipping away. But Uchenna's gaze was firm, his heart heavy with disappointment. He looked at her long and hard, remembering the prideful words she had spoken, the laughter she shared while mocking the poor, and the cruelty she had shown to his father. In that moment, all the beauty of her gown, all the riches that surrounded them, meant nothing. What mattered was dignity, respect, and the values he could not ignore. With a deep breath, he placed the microphone back in its stand and took his father's frail hand. I choose my father, he said simply, his voice carrying across the hall. A shocked murmur swept through the guests. Chica gasped, nearly collapsing as her friends tried to steady her. The cameras that once captured her radiant smile now recorded her disgrace. The gifts piled high in the corner, the decorations, the luxury cars outside, all of it turned meaningless as the groom walked away. Okorie, though weary, stood tall beside his son. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of wisdom. He looked out over the crowd and said, Never despise a man in rags. You may one day bow before him in robes. His words lingered like a prophecy, echoing in every heart present. As Uchenna led his father out of the hall, the guests rose, some nodding in respect, others whispering in awe. Chica remained seated, her makeup smeared with tears, staring blankly at the life that had crumbled before her eyes. What was meant to be her day of glory had ended in shame. The celebration was over, but the lesson remained, etched forever in the minds of all who witnessed it. Pride falls, but humility endures.